Picture someone, maybe you'll recognize yourself in this description, who's been dealing with a strange sensation in their feet for 2 years. Sometimes it's tingling, like when your foot falls asleep but for no apparent reason. Sometimes it's burning, especially at night, that makes it impossible to have blankets touching the feet. Sometimes it's numbness, that foot that doesn't quite feel like your own. They saw 3 doctors. All 3 said the same thing. It's circulation, it's age, take ibuprofen. Not one of them asked about fasting glucose. Not one measured vitamin B12. Not one evaluated peripheral nerve function. And yet, what that person has, what you might also have, has a very specific name, very specific causes, and in many cases, very specific solutions. Peripheral neuropathy, which is the medical name for damage to the peripheral nerves, the ones that go from the spine to the hands and feet, affects more than 30% of adults over 60 in the United States, 1 in 3, and most don't know they have it because the symptoms are so gradual, so intermittent at first, that they get confused with fatigue, poor circulation, or simply the years. What makes peripheral neuropathy especially frustrating is that it's one of the most underdiagnosed conditions in modern medicine. Not because it's hard to detect, there are very specific tests to evaluate it, but because in conventional medicine it's not part of the routine exam. Your doctor measures your blood pressure, takes blood, listens to your heart. But almost nobody systematically evaluates peripheral nerve function unless symptoms are severe enough that they can no longer be ignored. And by that point, the damage has been accumulating for years. What I'm going to tell you today is the science behind peripheral neuropathy after 50, its real causes, its early signs, and what you can do to slow it and in some cases partially reverse it. Because yes, and this is what I most want you to take from today, in many cases, peripheral nerve damage is not irreversible. There's a window of opportunity, and today I'm going to show you where it is. Peripheral nerves are the communication cables between the central nervous system, the brain and spinal cord, and the rest of the body. They carry 2 types of signals: motor signals, which go from the brain to the muscles to produce movement, and sensory signals, which go from the skin, muscles, and organs toward the brain to report on temperature, pain, pressure, and position. When those nerves get damaged, by any of the causes we're going to look at, they start transmitting incorrect signals or stop transmitting them altogether. The result is that collection of symptoms many people know without knowing they have a name: tingling, burning, numbness, the sensation of walking on cotton, cramps, weakness in the hands or feet. Peripheral nerves have a very specific structure that makes them especially vulnerable. They're surrounded by a layer of myelin, a fatty sheath that acts as electrical insulation and allows signals to travel fast and precisely. And that myelin sheath needs 2 things to stay intact: a constant supply of oxygen and nutrients through the blood vessels that supply it, and specific vitamins, especially B12 and B6, that are indispensable cofactors in myelin synthesis. When either of those 2 things fails, when blood flow to the nerve is reduced or when there's a deficiency of the necessary vitamins, the myelin deteriorates. The nerve starts transmitting signals with less precision, and that's what's felt as tingling, burning, or numbness. A study published in Neurology in 2022 found that nerve conduction velocity, the speed at which electrical signals travel through peripheral nerves, declines at a rate of 1 to 2% per year after 50 in people with untreated risk factors. 1 to 2% per year. Accumulated over 10 or 15 years, that's a nerve conduction loss of 15 to 30%, enough to produce significant symptoms in most people. Let's get to the causes. This is exactly where conventional medicine leaves an enormous gap I want to fill today. Elevated glucose is the first and most important, and it applies not just to people with diagnosed diabetes. High blood sugar damages peripheral nerves through three simultaneous mechanisms. First, it produces glycation of nerve proteins, the same process that damages skin collagen and brain membranes, which we already saw in previous videos. Second, it generates oxidative stress specifically in the axons, the long projections of nerve cells that transmit signals. Third, it damages the blood vessels that supply the nerves, the vasa nervorum, reducing the supply of oxygen and nutrients. The most important thing here is that this damage starts long before a diabetes diagnosis. Prediabetes, fasting glucose between 100 and 125 milligrams per deciliter, already produces measurable peripheral nerve damage. A study published in Diabetes Care in 2021 found that 29% of prediabetic patients already had signs of peripheral neuropathy at initial evaluation before receiving any diabetes diagnosis. 29%. With prediabetes, without knowing they had any glucose problem. Vitamin B12 deficiency is the second cause, and this is one of the most underestimated and most treatable. Vitamin B12 is indispensable for myelin synthesis. Without enough B12, the myelin sheath deteriorates, and B12 deficiency in adults over 50 is extraordinarily common, for two reasons almost nobody mentions in a medical appointment. The first is that B12 absorption depends on a protein produced in the stomach called intrinsic factor, and intrinsic factor production declines with age. The second, and this is the one I most want to say, is that metformin, the most prescribed diabetes medication in the world, blocks B12 absorption in the intestine. People taking metformin who don't supplement B12 have a very high risk of neuropathy from B12 deficiency, and that risk is very poorly communicated. Chronic systemic inflammation is the third, and here the direct connection is with the immune system. Inflammatory cytokines, those proteins we've mentioned in several videos, can directly attack the myelin sheath. It's the mechanism of autoimmune neuropathies, but it also occurs to a lesser degree in people with low-grade chronic inflammation, the kind produced by sedentary lifestyle, poor diet, obesity, chronic stress. Not at the same level as severe autoimmune neuropathies, but enough to accelerate peripheral nerve deterioration in people over 50. Vitamin D deficiency is the fourth, and the connection here is less known, but very well documented. Peripheral nerves have vitamin D receptors on their surface. Vitamin D regulates the expression of genes related to myelin synthesis and nerve cell survival. A meta-analysis published in Nutrients in 2023 analyzed 18 studies on vitamin D and peripheral neuropathy and found a significant inverse correlation. The lower the vitamin D levels, the greater the prevalence and severity of peripheral neuropathy. And vitamin D deficiency in adults over 50 in the United States exceeds 40%. Alcohol is the fifth, and it deserves mention even if it's uncomfortable. Alcohol is directly toxic to peripheral nerves. Two mechanisms: direct axon damage from acetaldehyde, alcohol's toxic metabolite, and B vitamin nutritional deficiency that alcohol produces by interfering with intestinal absorption. Alcoholic neuropathy is one of the most common and one of the most preventable, and it doesn't require being an alcoholic. Moderate but consistent consumption over years in a person over 50 with prior nutritional deficiency can be enough. The signals of peripheral neuropathy are so gradual and so easy to normalize that most people arrive at a medical appointment when the damage has already been advancing for years. Knowing the early signals is what makes the difference between a timely intervention and a late one. Do you feel tingling or numbness in your feet or hands that comes and goes, especially at night or when you've been still for a long time? That's the earliest signal of small fiber nerve dysfunction, the ones that transmit temperature and soft pain sensations. It's the first warning, and many people ignore it for years. Do you have difficulty feeling the temperature of water when you bathe with your feet? That's loss of thermal sensitivity, a specific signal of damage to the nerve fibers that transmit temperature. It's more severe than tingling and requires evaluation. Have you fallen or nearly fallen for no apparent reason, without tripping on anything, in the past 2 years? That can be loss of proprioception, the ability to know where your foot is in space without looking at it. Proprioception depends on specific peripheral nerve fibers. When they're damaged, balance is altered. Falls in adults over 65 have a very underestimated neuropathic component. Do you feel burning or pain in your feet, especially at night when you're at rest? That's active small fiber neuropathy. Nighttime burning is a classic signal. At night, when there are no distractions and the nervous system is in lower activity mode, those spurious signals from damaged nerves become more prominent. Exactly the same mechanism as the nighttime tinnitus we saw in the previous video. Do you have the sensation of walking on cotton, on sand, or that the floor feels different from what it is? That's loss of pressure sensitivity. The nerve fibers that transmit the sensation of contact and pressure in the sole of the foot are compromised. In people with diabetes, that loss of sensitivity is what produces diabetic foot ulcers, wounds that aren't felt, and that progress without the patient noticing. Do you have weakness in the hands, difficulty opening jars, holding small objects, making fine movements with the fingers? That's compromise of the motor nerve fibers, more advanced than sensory compromise. It requires neurological evaluation and electromyography. Here's what's going to matter most to you. And I want to tell you something that completely changes the conversation about peripheral neuropathy. Peripheral nerves have a capacity for regeneration that we underestimated for a long time. It's not fast. A peripheral nerve regenerates approximately 1 millimeter per day, which means recovery is slow and requires patience. But it does happen. When the cause of damage is eliminated and the right conditions are given, peripheral nerves can regenerate. Glucose control is the first and the most important. If elevated glucose is the #1 cause of peripheral neuropathy, then controlling it is the highest impact intervention, not just for people with diabetes, but for anyone with prediabetes or fasting glucose above 90 milligrams per deciliter. The changes we already covered in video 22, protein at breakfast, a walk after eating, reducing glucose spikes, have a direct impact on neuropathy progression. A study published in Diabetes Care in 2022 found that improvement in glycemic control produces a measurable slowdown of peripheral nerve damage in an average of 6 to 12 months. Vitamin B12 is the second, and in many patients, it's the most immediately effective intervention. If B12 deficiency is the cause or a contributing factor, supplementation can produce real improvement in symptoms within weeks. The most effective forms are methylcobalamin, the active form of B12, and adenosylcobalamin, which is the form most used in nerve tissue. Not the cyanocobalamin that comes in most cheap multivitamins. That form has lower bioavailability for the nervous system. The most concentrated food sources are beef liver, clams, salmon, sardines, and eggs. But if there's confirmed deficiency, supplementation is more efficient than diet alone. Alpha-lipoic acid is the third. And this is the one that most surprises my patients because very few know it. Alpha-lipoic acid is an antioxidant with a unique characteristic among antioxidants. It's soluble in both water and fat, which allows it to penetrate the myelin sheath and protect the axons from inside. There are more than 30 clinical studies showing its effectiveness in diabetic peripheral neuropathy. A meta-analysis published in Diabetic Medicine in 2021 found that alpha-lipoic acid supplementation significantly reduced neuropathic pain, burning, and tingling compared to placebo. The doses used in studies are between 300 and 600 milligrams per day. It's not in common foods in therapeutic amounts. It needs to be supplemented, and as always, with medical supervision. Exercise is the fourth, and the reason in this context is specific and fascinating. Moderate aerobic exercise produces something called neurotrophins, proteins that stimulate the growth and survival of nerve cells. The most relevant for peripheral neuropathy is BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, which we also mentioned in the Alzheimer's context. Exercise increases BDNF levels in the peripheral nervous system, stimulating the regeneration of damaged axons. A study published in Physical Therapy in 2023 found that 36 weeks of moderate aerobic exercise produced measurable improvements in cutaneous nerve fiber density, a direct measure of peripheral nerve regeneration in patients with moderate peripheral neuropathy. 36 weeks. 9 months of moderate exercise producing real nerve regeneration. It's not magic, it's BDNF doing its job. And I'll close with something that seems small, but in the context of peripheral neuropathy is fundamental: foot care. When sensitivity in the feet is reduced, small wounds, a blister, a cut, an ingrown nail, can go unnoticed and become serious infections. Checking your feet every day, wearing shoes that don't squeeze, keeping the skin hydrated. It's not vanity. It's prevention of one of the most serious complications of advanced peripheral neuropathy. Let me go back to the person from the beginning, the one who's been living with tingling and burning in their feet for 2 years. The one who saw 3 doctors and left with ibuprofen and no answers. That person deserves more than its circulation, its age. They deserve someone to measure fasting glucose and baseline insulin, to evaluate B12, vitamin D, thyroid function, to run a nerve conduction test, to explain what's happening and why, to give them a roadmap. That's what I tried to give you today, not a promise of a cure, a roadmap. Peripheral neuropathy doesn't have to be a sentence. I've seen patients with moderate neuropathy improve significantly in 6 to 12 months when the root cause was treated, when glucose was corrected, B12 was replenished, alpha-lipoic acid was added, walking 30 minutes a day was started. Not everyone improves equally. Not everyone starts from the same point. But the direction can always be better than doing nothing. Listen carefully to this. The peripheral nervous system is not static. It's not a fixed structure that can only deteriorate. It's living tissue that responds, that tries to repair itself, that, when you give it the right conditions, can do so. Peripheral neuropathy doesn't start with pain. It starts with silence. That soft tingling we ignore, that strange sensation we normalize. And it can be stopped exactly at that moment, in the silence, before the pain, when there's still plenty of time. Share this video with someone who's been dealing with tingling or burning in their feet and hasn't found an explanation. It may be the information that changes everything for them. And tell me in the comments, do you have any of the symptoms I described today? Tingling, burning, numbness, in the feet, in the hands, or both? Write it below. Subscribe if you want more content like this. Take care of yourself.